Welcome everyone we're on the final day of the summit, and I believe this is one of the final panel discussions of the summit. We think that this discussion is central to why we're here and what we're trying to do at this summit and beyond on this platform, negotiating the new normal. I'm really excited about the group of panelists we've put together to discuss this topic of rethinking legal education, because we've really tried to identify people who we feel have significant thought leadership that can be weaved together to really steer the discussion forward of what the future of legal education could look like. And I would love to welcome Professor Jonathan Askin, Ms. Femke Bartels, Chris Wray, James Pereira QC, and Tessa Manuello to this conversation. I think I would really love to go with you one by one and have you introduce yourself so people can get a little background into you and your work, and then we can kick it off from there. I think I would love you to do justice to your introduction. So Professor Askin, can you?
Yes, I'm Jonathan Askin. I'm a professor at Brooklyn Law School, where I primarily teach technology law, telecom law, taught startup law. The main thing I do these days is I run the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic, which is a full-service law firm run by law students, providing free legal support for innovative startups, usually pursuing socially virtuous missions that the law hasn't anticipated. So the objective is always to keep my students on the cutting edge of new technology at the intersection of legal and policy change, so that lawyers can keep up with the changing needs of a changing society.
Thank you. Is Femke, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Femke Bartels. I'm the managing partner at Think, School for Creative Leadership. And we support wonderful leaders like Margaret is one of them in their leadership and creative journey, with as an aim looking at society and systems and how we can build the futures that we want. And as in addition, I've also a visiting professor at UCLA at the law department, and we've been running a pilot this year and early next year again in terms of how we can infuse leadership and creativity in the work of law students to open up their possibilities, what they can do with the law.
Thank you. And Chris?
Chris Wray. I'm an entrepreneur with a background in physics and philosophy initially. Later read law and was called to the bar in England and Wales, and subsequently have been involved in research in cognitive science and systems theory. And my entrepreneurial ventures have ranged from medical products, distributing health products in developing world countries, in the legal field, trying to innovate in England after the Legal Services Act to see if we could increase direct access to the bar, and provide an alternative to fixed variable fee, a fixed fee alternative for litigants. Also organization development, including working with Hire Group on part of their fairly radical transformation in organization design, and most recently in the field of legal automation at Materium, and also novel forms of management and organization at Legra. So very, very happy to be here.
Yeah, really happy to have you, Chris. James?
Hi, I'm James Pereira. I just want to say what a fantastic group this is. I'm really enjoying hearing the introductions. I'm a QC at the bar in England. That means I'm kind of senior barrister. I'm a visiting professor of law at King's College in London. I divide my time between that and coaching. So I'm a NLP master practitioner, systemic coach in kind of business coaching, and also trained in family constellations work, which deals with kind of inherited trauma and transgenerational issues. And so I work with lawyers and firms and other groups in the coaching sphere as well as in the legal sphere.
Thanks, Kate. And Tessa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm really delighted to be here as well. I am the founder and the CEO of Legal Creatives, and we are an educational platform that is designed to give 21st century skills for the law to legal professionals and beyond, so we can create multidisciplinary approach to the future of law that is truly happening today. We are now in the future. It's official. I think 2020 made it official. And so we're very happy to be here with you to share a little bit about our insights, our experience, especially in creative thinking and legal design.
Thank you. So I think anyone listening and watching on to this discussion can see the different expertise we have on this panel, which I think is really exciting. And so I want to throw out the first question to you, Professor Askin, because you are the one person on the panel, I believe, who is still in traditional academic institutional work, and you, albeit in tech and startup. Do we need to rethink legal education?
Well, I certainly think so. I'm not sure what most of my colleagues think. I think to some extent I've been historically a bit of an aberration inside legal academia. But it's funny, I was looking at the title of this discussion here. It's Rethinking Legal Education and Empirically Responsible Legal System Change. Now, I got to tell you, I'm probably the poster child against the title. I've been teaching for about 15 years. And what I noticed when I first started teaching was that we were really just, at least in America legal education, we were creating cookie cutter lawyers. We were teaching every young law student to think like this. Now we claim we teach them to think creatively, and we do think logically. We teach them to think logically. We don't necessarily teach them to think creatively or like the startups that are changing the world. So when I would teach telecom law, all my students would want to know, well, what's the law? What's going to be on the test? And all I could think of is, in the 21st century, we don't know what's going to be on the test. We don't know what the future of a lawyer is going to be. You're going to have to be agile, self-motivated, mutable as the startups that are emerging and changing the world. So essentially, it's a sort of a 180-degree reversal of what I thought we were teaching in law school. So my objective historically, and I never taught first-year law students, I only taught second and third-year law students. A lot of what I did was to untrain them with the things that they were learning in their first year. So I wanted them to think that there isn't necessarily a right answer, especially in technology law, internet law. And isn't that a great thing? It would panic a lot of the students, but isn't it a great thing that you are going into the world armed with new ways of thinking? You are a smart layperson with a broad understanding of the world. And isn't that good in a world where there are no regimented laws, where we know that for the next 50 years of your career, you are going to be working to change the law, that you are flexible, agile enough to be a meaningful partner and not just restating what the law was in the 20th, the 19th, the 17th century, but you are someone who is now shaping the new law. So what the static law says becomes irrelevant in a world where we have smart, legally trained people capable of mutating it. So for me, it's a lot about, when you think about what lawyers, at least in America, do, and I know there's more flexibility, certainly in the UK, lawyers are trained to be very precise, very methodical, very slow. That is antithetical to what the world is doing around us. So for me, we cross every T, we dot every I, we don't release a document until it's perfect. The world is moving way too fast for that. So how can we train agile lawyers to think quickly, but also respond quickly and not be so terrified that they might fail. So for me, it's a lot about trial and error, failing fast and moving on and figuring it out. So for the past 15 years that I've been teaching, I've completely mutated my program every year, depending on the new skills, the new technology, and the passions and interests of my students, so that we are as ready when they graduate to be meaningful participants with their colleagues with whom they went to college with, who are now the entrepreneurs, the technologists, who are in fact changing the world. Can we be meaningful parts of that, of hacking the new world order? I think I'll stop there. We can double back on some of that, I think.
Yeah, I do want to come back to you on what you said. So you've been rethinking legal education for a while. So you've been doing it with your students. You were there. You said you were the poster child against the title, and I think you're looking at the part that refers to empirically responsible legal system change. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I'd love to have a little debate.
You hit the right term. I was thinking, am I really being empirically responsible? And the truth is, I'm not. I am constantly rethinking legal education, but for 15 years, I haven't done any empirical studies on whether or not it's actually effective, and I'm doing anything differently or better than I was 15 years ago when I first started teaching. In many ways, I think I need to revisit all that. But I'll tell you, the big problem is I don't collect data. I'm not a data scientist. I work at a standalone law school. We don't collect any data. I have no idea, except for anecdotal evidence from my students, that what they've learned in my classes is somehow helpful to where they're going in the profession and the role they're serving in changing society.
Got you. And I think I do want everyone else on the panel to take a stab at that, that's violent language, but to try that question as well. Do you think there's need to rethink legal education? But before, I just want to define what we mean by empirically responsible legal system change, so that we're all on the same page and we can discuss that a little bit, because that is actually a really critical component of what we are trying to do in the world through the Future Law Institute. And we use the phrase empirically responsible legal system change because we feel when we look at the way our laws and legal systems have progressed, they have progressed and have been built on an underlying philosophy, which cognitive science and systems theory is now, the combination of those sciences is showing it is not empirically responsible the way we've arranged our affairs. So for example, in cognitive science, it is developing that there is no disembodied rational mind. We take more embodied approaches to decision making, but then our legal systems are based on the rational, separate, independent, selfish mind. And systems theory is showing us, and complex adaptive systems theory showing us that we are all interconnected, but then our legal systems based on us being separate again. And so that's what we mean by empirically responsible legal system change. I just wanted to put that out there at the top, and not that, oh, we want to change the law in a way that we are collecting the data and we can know for sure that this is what is happening. We are saying that science, there's been a revolution in science, there's been a shift, and now we need to see how we can realign laws and legal systems to be more relevant and to who we are. So James, would you like to take a stab at this question? Do you think we need to rethink legal education? And from your perspective, why? Yeah. If it's yes.
So I know that when I teach law at King's, I teach it very conventionally because that's what the system requires, that's what the exam requires, that's what the students demand and need, that's what the university needs. But my thing really is about teaching skills. I mean, that's my coaching practice. It's really about teaching skills rather than teaching law, and changing skills and empowering with skills rather than trying to change the law. And this thing about being empirically responsible, I would say that when lawyers don't do well, it's not the education that's ever questioned, it's the lawyer that's questioned. They're not succeeding for some reason, and it's to do with them. And hey, it must be to do with them because look, there are other people who have gone through the same system that are doing well, and so the difference is them. And for me, I guess it's really about empowering people so they can do the things they're expected to do or they want to do, more importantly, in an easier, more resourced way. And what I would say about conventional legal education is the bar's a great example of this. It's not much different now, because I talk to young kids who are kind of doing their pupillage, doing their training, and their junior barristers now. It's not much different now to what it was when I trained in the 90s, which is that you're given a lot of messaging about how you're supposed to be, you know, burn the midnight oil, and your client's future rests on your shoulders, and you know, you're at the coal face, and all of these things that are meant to frighten you into high performance, but they also put a huge burden on you, particularly if people fail or they think they're failing. But also just the teaching of practical skills like advocacy. It teaches you what the advocate is supposed to look like. You know, when you say something, this is what's supposed to come out of your mouth, and this is what it's supposed to sound like. When you write something, this is what it's supposed to look like. And even if one takes that and accepts that as a suitable model of appearance, what they don't teach you is, okay, if you start here and you've got to get here, how do you fill that space in between the two things? How do you move from, I'm a lawyer, I'm being told that I've got to look like this, but I've got all sorts of stuff going on for me and all kinds of things happening, which mean for me, it's quite challenging to get from here to this place here. And that's really the space that I'm operating in. So for me, the need for change is about skills training. I think skills training will empower people. It will actually make them better lawyers, even on the kind of metrics that conventional education would measure them by. And I think we need to go back to the kind of idea of the cookie cutter lawyer, even if in many respects the external appearance of the lawyer is quite cookie cutter and may not change for a while. The ways that you mix the ingredients, what you put into the cookie dough and how you bake it and so on, it seems to me those could be very, very different. And trying to get people, trying to understand people's own mechanisms and how they can best get to the cookie shape at the end, I think is really important, because we do have a kind of one size fits all system at the moment.
Thanks. Thank you for that answer, James. And so skills training, and I would like to kick that over to Femke, who, you know, running Think School of Creative Leadership. I mean, I went, it was an incredible program for any professional across the board, but it certainly can transform the way lawyers think, because it's really an unpacking of that. And Femke, also because, you know, you also have worked in the policy space, serving as a policy advisor to the European Parliament and the Dutch Ministry of the Environment. I will put that question to you. Do we need to rethink legal education, and is it about skills, as James is saying?
And so, full disclosure, I didn't study law. So I'm really an outsider. I'm a political scientist. And I have worked a lot with lawyers to actually change society. So that's kind of from the outside looking in. And so I think in general, if you ask, do we need to change education? It's like a resounding yes. Because as some of the other people already talked about, our education used to be very much based on knowledge and knowledge transfer. And then if you went to university, then until you were like going into retirement, you had the knowledge from university that would carry you through your whole career. And nowadays, as soon as you leave the university, you're already outdated. So the knowledge is actually not that useful as a key component. And then there's two other components. If we look at learning programs, it's the skills and it's the mindset. And so I'll focus on the mindset. So we already talked about skills. It's like our university system has been built for a complicated world, where if you think long and hard enough, and if you have smart enough people around the room, you can find one or two right answers. Well, now we live in complexity and it's fast changing. There's a lot of system dynamics. And as a part of that, if you think long and hard enough, and if you're really analytical, then you can say something about the past, but not about what's happening now or about the future. So it's a very different way of not just navigating complexity, but also being okay with not knowing and trying things out and see how it goes. And so that's very much a mindset element. And this is like in leadership called like vertical development. Like, how are we training people to learn at every moment that they have, to be able to cope with that complexity and to make sense out of what's happening and to be able to collaborate together and create new futures. So I think that is a real crucial thing. And if we're not teaching that at schools, what are those schools for? And that is one of the things that we hear a lot, working with big, like also like international organizations such as UNICEF, but also with big corporates, that there's a huge gap between what students are being trained for at university and what society actually needs. And so the university have to get their act together, I would say. And that's also why I really like being part of this pilot initiative with UCLA, because we are actually running a program that is around system thinking, design thinking, leadership capabilities. And it gives the students a real taste of what it is to experiment and learn and fail fast and come up with different solutions and really see what the law has, but also what as a lawyer you can learn from different disciplines. So yes, we need to rethink legal education for sure.
Yeah, so this is incredible, and the story that is emerging is becoming clearer and clearer from Jonathan, you know, having that skill set to be failing fast and learning as you go and constantly mutating, and James with skills, and you developing on the skills into mindsets and you know, the new ways of being and doing we have to be. I'm gonna come to Tessa, because Tessa, you are engaged directly in creating programs around the new skills and mindset.
Absolutely,
lawyers.
thank you for the opportunity to share, and I've really enjoyed the conversation so far, and I hope I'm going to be able to contribute to that by sharing a little bit what we do at Legal Creatives, but mostly why we do what we do. And I think it's maybe not obvious for everyone, but we really need a change in education at large, not just legal education. And the reason for that is because society is changing so fast with the integration of technology in the way we communicate, work, consume. And I mean, you know, probably panelists here know even better than me, but like the number one skill we need to learn is to learn how to learn, because the society is going to change so fast. So when we go to law school or to any universities and we are born into a 4-year program, in 4 years, we don't know what society is going to be like. We don't know how advanced technologies are going to be like. We don't even know how many tasks are going to be automated. So we need now to have a system of education that is allowing to build skills in a much faster way, but also that is allowing people to learn how to relearn, because in 5 years we'll need to learn other things. And so that's what we really committed to do at Legal Creatives for the legal sector. So we're very committed to to enhance those capacities in the legal sector using just, sorry about that, yes, thank you. We just, sorry about that. We're very much committed to build those new skills, especially creative thinking. Creative thinking has been established as one of the most important and critical skills for the future. Because once you start being creative, you start thinking about the new, you start thinking about, you know, coming up with creative ideas and creative solutions. And so that's very much what we are invested in. Now, I want to just go back to the previous question that was really interesting, the empirical aspect of system change. I think this is really interesting because in the law schools, we are not being trained at doing empirical reviews and assessments. It's very much qualitative research that we do. And the way we teach is also based on the qualitative research that I have personally done, but is also based on empirical studies. But now it's going to be really critical for us to start measuring the success of our new programs. And so we very much invested into finding a way to measure the success of people who are going to learn with us, who are actually learning with us. But how we're going to measure that, this is very complicated. We have one metrics that we use, and that is related to the social impact we aim to have at LEGO Creative, that is to reduce the access to justice gap to 1 billion people. In the world, we have at least 5 billion people who do not have access to justice, sometimes live in very critical conditions of injustice. And so we believe we can reduce this gap by 1 billion when we come together and we work together. So this is going to be one of the outcomes we're hoping to reach. And so we're going to be evaluating how we can have a bigger impact with creative thinking, with LEGO design, in order to serve more people with justice outcomes. So I don't have yet the solution, and I think it's for us to create and this is why panels like this are so great, because we can get inspiration and more ideas from each other.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Tessa. And Chris? What fascinates me about your work, and you did a presentation earlier, which I could not attend, and I really wanted to attend that in particular, about cognitive science and its, impact on. So could you share a bit on that, and in answer to the question, do we need to rethink legal education? Because you're kind of like the polymath here as well.
Thank you. I suppose I come at rethinking legal education from a slightly different angle, which is more trying to harness it to another end. The analogy I'd suggest is that in the same way that physics provided an excellent training in providing the kind of core skills to allow actually surprising creativity in, say, quantitative finance as a discipline. Now, I'm not saying that those innovations necessarily created value for society. In many ways, they didn't, and it might have been a lot better had those creative skills been put towards other ends. But nonetheless, physics as a discipline provided certain ways of analyzing and model building that were able to be applied in a broader context. And so, for me, the promise I see in law and legal education is that it potentially provides some of those core skills for systemic thinking, for systems design. One of the things I note about law is that even when it's taught conventionally, law students start to learn to parse and analyze a particular situation, not just on one particular systemic level, the kind of narrative level, but to kind of also analyze it on a slightly abstracted level. And I think that's an excellent introduction to the cognitive flexibility that comes with developing reflective dispositions in particular, and the reflective mind. So I think there's very important work been done over the last decade. If you look at people like Stanovich, Toplak, and West, and their whole research program on the reflective mind, going beyond what I think has entered the popular culture now of the kind of system 1, system 2, fast thinking, slow thinking. A lot of people have heard of that now, but what's interesting is where that research went after that. And making that distinction between, yes, your kind of slow, deliberative, potentially analytical reasoning, highly correlated with IQ on the one hand, and on the other hand, reflective dispositions and the reflective mind, less well correlated with IQ, much more about the formation of certain habits of thought, and actually therefore much more promising in terms of personal development and personal cognitive development, because it's not saying, oh, well, there's this thing IQ and it is what it is and it's fairly stable over a lifetime, so not much scope for personal development. Instead, it's saying, no, actually, the thing that's really important here, which determines whether you apply your IQ through the wrong frame and drive yourself through to the wrong answer because you haven't stepped back, versus actually having that reflective capacity to question, to doubt, to understand assumptions, to be able to overcome some of your cognitive biases, which is a better predictor of performance on tests of intelligence more broadly, rather than the kind of narrow aspects being measured by IQ. So I think just as you say, cognitive science really has developed quite dramatically, especially in the last decade. And again, you know, there's all sorts of things I could name here, but you know, if you look at the last 10 years worth of work in predictive coding paradigms, embodied cognition, it's, you know, this is very exciting, and the kind of insight that's giving us to how it is that we develop our capacity to direct and redirect our attention, which goes to how we make sense, how sense making takes place, and the interaction between the individual mind undertaking that exercise and group sense making or group decision making, and you know, again, just taking one little thing, the idea that it's much easier to spot cognitive biases in another person than it is in yourself, and therefore, you know, any sound design of a decision-making process is going to build in that kind of you know, systemic procedural you know, feedback and challenge on a group level, rather than trying to put it in the mind of a single individual. So I think there's a lot there, but in a way I'm more hoping to take from the law than from legal education than necessarily to give to it. I think it can be a great starting point for a more systemic, a more systems theoretic or systems theoretically informed approach to problem solving. But I don't see that being sort of explicitly developed, and I think it certainly could be. I see glimpses of it in you know, like mediation tends to be kind of well integrated into the conventional legal syllabus now, and so there's the beginnings of a sense of a broader problem solving attitude. What is the system of things that is happening here, and where might we intervene to change that system for the better, which again will require a more reflective, a more open-minded consideration of, well, there's maybe more than one possible point of intervention, and we don't simply have to you know, take out our hammer and treat everything as a nail. I think that's enough of a sort of, you know.
That's a lot, and I can't pretend to understand much of what you've said, but there was this thing you're talking about, the embodied cognition, which is what I've done a little bit of reading on, that I think really challenges the way we make decisions in court, the way we decide this is true and this is not true, and the reliance we place on juries and judges. It's that we have a disembodied rational mind, and we can make these decisions in this way, but that's not really what the science is showing us. So it's a bit
right. A functioning court is quite a complex system.
Yeah.
With a you know, there's a systemic hierarchy there, and I don't mean hierarchy in the, if you listened to my talk earlier, I don't mean hierarchy in a kind of necessarily top-down command and control sense of hierarchy. I simply mean that there are different decisions. It's an information processing system, and there are decisions of different scope and detail that need to be made. And there are trade-offs there, because one can't simultaneously consider great detail and broad scope. And so there's actually quite a complex structured information processing system, and I think it pays to consider the the different cognitive capacities required, and you know, sort of beyond cognitive and emotional, affective capacities required to make those different kinds of information processing that are happening. You know, there are questions which can be reduced to a very low dimensional representation. They can be relatively objectively clearly expressed. There are relatively few things to take into account, and perhaps that kind of decision can be fairly broadly distributed. There's no particular expertise required to make it. Perhaps you could open it out to a jury, for instance, a kind of diverse set of minds. On the other hand, there will be you know, decisions that need to be made where you know, there's very specific expertise required, and you wouldn't, and it may be kind of, you know, very high dimensional space in which those problems are being considered. So it will rather require great expertise, or if you're going to ask someone without particular expertise to engage with such a problem, it had better be one which engages one of their evolved capacities. So you know, we all as human beings have, you know, relatively great capacity to detect lies. You know, is someone telling the truth or not? It's you know, there's many factors that get integrated in that kind of a judgment, and it's fairly intuitive. And provided you have someone in the right kind of context for which they evolved to be good at that skill, then it's reasonable to rely on it. So, you know, a human being making a judgment about whether a stranger, so where they don't have a particular connection or bias, you know, is a stranger telling the truth or not, maybe that you know, that could be quite reliable. But you'd better have other mechanisms in place that are going to, you know, procedurally ensure that that any of the number of biases that might be introduced aren't going to distort that decision. Because if we're relying on that kind of evolved capacity, it is subject to the full range of cognitive biases, and so that it's going to make it different. So I just think I use this when I'm teaching systems theory. I use the court, a trial by jury, as a case study of talking through a complex information processing system. Because I think it's a great illustration of how different capacities are being engaged, so as a whole to produce, you know, relatively robust decisions.
Oh my, I would love to learn more about that course. That would be incredible. And so we'll talk about that after. Jonathan, is there anything you want to pick up on from what Chris was saying? I'm going to turn to someone I think who is brighter than me that can address some of these points.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you. Chris's talk just hit me to my core. It is profoundly terrifying and frustrating to hear what he's saying, because this is I feel like what he's saying is about we are in law, and law's integration with other skills and sectors is about a generation away from getting where Chris knows we should go. I've spent about the past 10 years trying to figure out how to integrate law students with technologists, with entrepreneurs, with marketing folks. We ran, so I used to take my students to hackathons 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And we were always the wallflowers at the revolution. We would see folks integrate and build systems the way I think you're sort of describing these potential systems in sort of micro levels, 4, 5, 10 people getting together and sharing their respective silos of knowledge and then blending them, and the adjacent possible occurs and amazing things happen. And we were the lawyers at this revolution. We would go and stand on the sideline like wallflowers, just watching the amazing stuff going on. And at the very end, we take our legal thing to the problems and we say, this is amazing what you did. You can't do it because it's illegal, because you didn't follow this rule, blah, blah, blah. And that was that's what we were training law students to do 10 years ago. And I thought that was horrible. How do we train lawyers with the ethos about which I think you see in other sectors, other knowledge, educational programs? So we did the first ever legal hackathon. And I got to say, it's nothing like what I saw in regular hackathons or what I'm thinking you're imagining with systems development would be. We were essentially symposia hackathons on training wheels. We were essentially a bunch of talking heads talking about the integration of law and technology in society, much like any other legal symposium. But we didn't know how to do this integrated systems development stuff. And so I've been essentially banging my head for the past 10 years, figuring out how we train lawyers to become project managers, to play a meaningful role in broader development. And it's antithetical, I think, to the way most people decide to go to law school and what they learn in law school. So for me, it's all about, so I used to do podium classes, lecture classes. I don't do that anymore because I feel like, yes, the substance, you can learn the substance somewhere else. How do we train them to actually participate effectively in society and use their knowledge and their wisdom and their intellect to better integrate? And I am at a loss as to how to, it succeeds periodically. So there was a fellow who's been speaking on a bunch of panels here the past few days, Mark Podkowitz. He sort of came to law school with this deep understanding and broad base of knowledge that makes him well suited. But I would got to say 99% of the students with whom I work don't have that broad base and the ability to think in the way that I think Chris is describing the future should be, with integrated, humans creating these integrated systems. And I'm not sure, I'm sure I missed a lot of the points about what Chris is talking about, but this is my eternal frustration. I think lawyers, you go to law school because you are a terrific test taker, fast thinker. You could spit stuff out, but ultimately in the long run, does that really help you to be a thoughtful participant?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like I've had a lived experience of that, qualifying at 22 and being very tunnel focused, learning in that way and having to really unpack a lot. I think has been really great in helping me to rethink my own legal education. So it was really great, Femke. Unfortunately, we started late, and what we've gotten here is a little taste of how important this topic is going forward for the future. I would like to open up the floor for questions for a couple of minutes. If there's anyone that has questions for this panel on how do we rethink, I'm seeing we have 8 minutes left. Anyone has any questions on how do we rethink legal education? Now is the time.
Yeah, I would like to contribute a bit, Margaret. Thank you so much for this panel discussion. And I would like to take this point about empirical research, which Professor Jonathan mentioned, and which is, of course, the theme of this discussion today. From my own experience, and I'm currently in India, but I did my master's and I'm still continuing my education from the Netherlands, and it is still about law and technology. And one of my own reviews about international education is the inherent cultural difference, which is there. Like, for example, people from the East use a very different terminology, and people in the West use a very different terminology to explain the same concept. The World Bank, for example, understands developing countries to be a different set of countries, whereas the general perception of developing countries is very different. And the basic assumption on which we start our research, be it empirical research, be it non-empirical research, is very different. And I think that is not addressed per se anywhere, because of course that is huge. You cannot really, like, if professors start, identifying what are those inherent points of bias or what are those assumptions which have a different meaning in both sides of the earth, I think it'll be a huge task. But I think if it is, I don't know, by means of empirical research, if universities start collecting, like, okay, fine, what do you think is your experience if you're coming from a different country and pursuing education in another country? What are your challenges? And I think having that kind of database and automating maybe the responses to kind of improvise it in your method of teaching, or in kind of having a primer after the point teachers give out the syllabus to students, might be helpful for international students who come from different countries and who have absolutely no idea about another country when they start their education. Yeah, that's one of the remarks which I feel, and it's out of experience. Yeah, that's pretty much it from my side.
Okay, any panelist wants to respond?
Yes, I'd love to reply to this very briefly. Thank you for this insightful comment, Saswati. I really appreciate you participating in the conversation, because I really do believe like we need to take into account cultural differences. We need to take into account the fact that, let's say, I was talking about access to justice earlier. It does not necessarily mean exactly the same thing depending on the jurisdictions. We all have a different understanding, and there's a lot of discussions. Is access to justice only access to a judge, or could it be access to a mediator, or could it be access to a machine that is going to help you adjudicate the disputes? So I think it's going to be a very interesting field of research. And what I feel that is really important is that we also move from knowledge-based education to skill-based education. Once we measure skills that are human skills, we all have those skills wherever we are in the world as human beings. And then we can start measuring the progress we are making. In universities right now, we are measuring knowledge. There's nothing related to skills, especially in law schools. And that's the approach we're taking. We're saying, okay, well, come and join us and learn with us. You already have your knowledge. You have probably way more knowledge than you need. And now you need to gain some skills. You need to be able to communicate better. You need to also be able to pitch better your ideas. You need to be able to collaborate, to work on projects. I think what Jonathan was saying, we need to be able to manage project, and first to initiate project and not just deliver legal services. So anyway, I just wanted to jump on this because I think moving from knowledge-based education to skill-based education is key. And I don't see that happening so much in universities, but I'm happy to meet that Jonathan has been doing this for decades now, which is great. So I didn't know about it. So very happy to learn about those great initiatives around the world.
Yeah. And we just have a couple more minutes, so I'd just like to invite the other panelists. James, haven't heard from you, just your final comments. I know this has been just like a drop on this topic.
Yeah, I guess I'm really grateful to have participated in this, and I hope we can all kind of stay in touch and carry the conversation on afterwards. That'd be great. I guess the thing that is really at the forefront of my mind is about normalization, because when you try to train an individual or even a group, there's almost a kind of certain shyness about entering the realm of what your personal skills are, what your personal attributes are, what you're equipped with. It's almost a kind of culture of a lack of openness about that. And I think one of the great things that could be achieved is if you could change legal education to normalize skills and mindsets and so on as being part of the mainstream, so there'd be a greater openness and therefore a greater ability for people to learn. I think at the moment there's a kind of almost a cultural clash between those who want to learn those things and the kind of ecology of the system that we're in that doesn't necessarily welcome that very much. And that would be a great thing to try and achieve.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Femke, some final comments?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like this panel called Rethinking Education, legal education. I think it's about redoing legal education. Because I think otherwise we use the same thinking that got us in this problem in the first place. And so I wouldn't call myself a system thinker, but more a system changer. So just for all of us in this panel, in this group, like what's the leverage we have? What's the possibility we have to help change the system that actually is for the future and is helping students, and work within that space to actually redo the legal education. So that is at least something I'll be taking away and I'll be thinking about, and how I can apply myself to that.
Yeah, Jonathan?
Well, to piggyback on what Femke was saying, in America, it's going to take a revolution because we are captive to the American Bar Association, the AALS, and US News and World Report. So US News and World Report is based on, when they rank law schools, they rank them on metrics that go back to 1980. It's all about passing the bar and knowing the substantive knowledge. It's not about, law school is the only trade school from which you graduate from without knowing your trade. And that is a self-perpetuating model where you learn the substance, but you don't learn how to practice your trade. And until we can convince the ranking bodies to change the metrics and value skills over knowledge, at least in America, we're a long way off from entirely revamping the legal education model.
Thank you. Chris, final comments?
I think the final comment, again, would be a bit even broader than legal education, but it's, I think we need to get better at teaching the absolute basics, the basic skills for personal development as a human being. The cognitive, the emotional, how to learn, how to unlearn, how to make sense of one's own thoughts, how to make sense of the system of things happening in and around you. It's like, you know, it's like not teaching people to read or write or do basic maths, and then trying to develop people's skills at subjects that require those basic skills. We're not giving people the basics. Systems theory tends not to be taught in a practical way. Systems theoretic skills tend to be taught full of jargon and little sense. As I'm very critical of a lot of, you know, there's this kind of culture of complexity woo. If you drop in the word complexity or systems or emergent, it's like throwing AI into your startup pitch. It makes it sound cool, but there's actually often little understanding behind it. And yet there's profound understanding there to be had. And it's not being appreciated and it's not being well taught. So I think we could do a lot starting with the basics.
And where can we go to learn more about the courses that you offer, Chris?
If you, I'll share my contact details, and I can point you in the direction of, you know, existing materials that I think are high quality.
And I would really like to encourage everyone here to check out the organizations behind these panelists, because each of them in their own way is pioneering a new type of education that can benefit lawyers. So think thnk.org with Femke, Bartels, the Liberal Partnership. Thank you. If you all could just put the links to make it easier for everyone so that they can find you. But Tessa, you get to close it off.
Well, that's a lot of responsibilities, but I will take the challenge. Well, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's watching live, who's going to watch the replay. And I truly hope out of this panel discussion, you're going to be inspired to contribute to the awakening of a new legal education. And as Jonathan said, the metrics may not be helping for a renewal of education, but I think the market is the best metrics. The market is desperate for new legal solutions. Hence, you need to probably invest in yourself in getting the skills that are going to help you survive and very likely thrive in this new era. So we look forward to see you taking initiatives, and let us know how you're doing with those new skills. And I think everybody is going to be happy to help you on this journey. So thank you so much for listening and being with us.
Thank you so much to my amazing panelists for taking the time. Each of you are very, very busy, and you have taken the time to come and share with us on how we can redo legal education. I love how Femke put that. And yeah, and so I'm really excited as well, Future Law Institute, to work with each of you and your organizations to see how we can find the intersections and collaborate. Thank you, and thank you to all those watching and who will watch the replay.